I know a bunch of people want bad balance Remy, and while I think Remy is a pretty mediocre character, I don't think he's really non-viable enough to warrant one yet. But there are certain parts of his kit which stand out as having really terrible design. The most obvious, in my opinion, is his third super, Blue Nocturne. For those of you who don't know, Remy's third super is actually a counter super. After you do the input, Remy puts up one leg. If you hit Remy during this period, he'll unleash a flurry of attacks ending with a flash kick. For what it's worth, this is actually Remy's strongest super in terms of damage, and the meter is actually very short considering how strong it is. If you don't hit Remy, he eventually has recovery where he can't block. Unlike Dudley's cross counter, the damage is not relative to the attack Remy parries. So what's so bad about that? Well, where do I begin? First of all, the freeze. Every time you do this super, on the first frame it will freeze the screen, allowing opponents to see you've just activated Blue Nocturne. Counter supers are a mechanic Street Fighter titles have struggled with for a while, because they insist on having this freeze. A better designed counter super will either have no freeze, or only show the freeze once it activates. Look at Daimon's Neomax. You might not even realize it's a counter if it whiffs. Yet if you hit him, this happens. The difference is the opponent needs to have already committed pre-freeze in SF3, or else even if they were going to do something, they can just react to the freeze and wait for the recovery to punish you. In fact, the opponent can hold up after the freeze to get a jump in punish. This means you need to do Blue Nocturne on the prayer that they're about to attack. Depending on what you're countering, this window might only be a few frames wide even if you know exactly when it's coming. Which of course you won't. Alternatively, you need to do Blue Nocturne only when the opponent does a move you can react to. There are very few attacks like this in Third Strike. And don't say Denjin, because Blue Nocturne won't work on fireballs. Two, Blue Nocturne doesn't have any kind of lock-in on airborne opponents. For example, if you counter an air normal, Remy is actually punishable even on hit. This also applies when you counter universal overheads. This is a somewhat common meaty and one of the few potentially reactable ones, so this would be a really great place to use Blue Nocturne if it actually worked. At the very least, the grounded vacuum effect is extremely good. 3. While the short meter is somewhat attractive, it's actually really detrimental. While Remy famously has a hard time building meter, his EX moves are actually pretty good, particularly his EX fireballs. Blue Nocturne stocks exactly 2 EX moves. If you're sitting on a Blue Nocturne waiting for a good opportunity to use it, you're not building any meter. And if you do use it, even if it works, you're back to 0. Both of Remy's other supers stock 2 bars, which means you can use EX while keeping super in the back, or vice versa. So not only is Blue Nocturne a bad super, it's also the worst super Remy can run if he doesn't want to use super at all. 4. It gives away your intent. The opponent sees you picked Blue Nocturne. And if you say, well, that means they're going to give me free wake-ups trying to bait Blue Nocturne, keep dreaming. It just means they're going to do stuff like meaty jumping overheads or meaty throws more often. 5, and we're getting to the really big problems now, it doesn't work in punishes. You might remember from my Sean and 12 videos, but in the system mechanics of SF3, having good punishes is a really big deal. This is because you get an opportunity to punish just about every time you get a grounded parry. Here's an optimal punish from a close parry when using SA2. And again using SA3. Note the huge loss in damage. This gets to be even more extreme with his distant parries. Compare. Picking SA3 makes Remy's parries much less rewarding, which hurts his offense and defense alike. 6. You can't generally confirm Blue Nocturne either. With Remy's other supers, you can land certain attacks and then super on reaction. But with Blue Nocturne, you've got nothing to go into. And generally speaking, SA3 has no confirms of its own, because it relies on the opponent attacking you at specific times, which is usually out of your control. Sure, you can do something minus then counter immediately, hoping they'll press a button. But hoping is usually the best you can do. The final weakness is one which I think is going to surprise some people, but it's the weakness I consider to be the most important to why Blue Nocturne is a bad super. It's because it has a near perfect overlap with SA2. I know that sounds really strange, but hear me out for a second. I'm going to go through the scenarios where SA3 actually works well, and in all of them, SA2 actually works even better. First of all, wake up. If you're picking SA3, you're probably doing it to dissuade meaties, but again, it only works if they've already committed to the meaty. Well, SA2 is invincible, so it also works against meaties. And unlike Blue Nocturne, SA2 doesn't care if the opponent is airborne. It loses damage, but at least it doesn't fall out and become punishable. Earlier, I kept saying SA3 generally has no confirms. I say generally because actually you can confirm SA3 off of your opponent's multi-hit moves. If you parry one hit of a multi-hit attack, you can super the next hit. Obviously this is insanely situational, and there are whole characters who don't even have a good multi-hit move. It sounds like a great way to show off, except SA2 is invincible so it works in exactly the same way. Not that you would, because you could just parry the whole attack and then do a combo to SA2. This does as much damage as a raw SA3 anyway. A nice gimmick with SA3 is you can do Sonic Booms then buffer super. If the opponent tries to super through a Sonic Boom, you activate SA3 and punish it. Once again, the invincibility of SA2 means it still works here. What I'm saying is, in the few places where Blue Nocturne can actually do some work, SA2 also works. You might be saying, but Baf, SA3 is cheaper and stronger than SA2 in those scenarios. Well, yeah, you're right, but also SA2 is way more useful elsewhere. As I said, it works in its general confirms, it can be used after a parry, it stores more EX, and all the rest. In practice, Blue Nocturne just has no real edge on SA2. Thankfully, characters only need one decent super in SF3 since you only choose one anyway, and Remy is still in a better boat than most of the cast for having two good supers. Still, I think the readily apparent uselessness of SA3 stands out even among the other bad supers of the game, which is why I could make this video. Hope you enjoyed.